Hello and welcome to another instalment of Unmanned Uncovered. I'm your podcast host, Bryn Lucas. This podcast is brought to you by Consortic, here to help you take your drone program to new heights. If you want to find out more, just go to consortic.com. My guest this time is Simon Brown, the CEO of TEKTowr. Before joining TEKTowr, he was the head of IT architecture at Heathrow Airport, managing a £100 million per annum portfolio across all operations. He also founded the Fly to Plan Future Flight Consortium. Let's get straight to it. Simon, welcome to the podcast. Thanks very much for joining me.
Thank you very much, Bryn. Looking forward to talking.
Well, I think really the first thing we should do is get a little bit of information about you, kind of dive into who you are, how you got to be where you currently are at, and your career in general, I suppose, as well. So a simple question to start with, but, you know, in a minute or two, can you give us your entire life history?
Oh, wow, a minute or two. Okay. So my name's Simon Brown. I was a former head of IT architecture at Heathrow Airport. And prior to that, spent 17 years working in air traffic control as a systems engineer. I joined air traffic control in '99, and it was meant to be a stopgap job while I got back on my feet and started in a more serious job, having left university. So yeah, it's a bit of a whirlwind tour of aviation that I've done so far. And now I find myself as Chief Executive Officer of a small startup called TEKTowr, and now working on some future flight challenge projects in 4D simulation and also some blockchain data exchange transformation as a result of getting involved in the Future Flight project.
It sounds like we've got a lot to get through in this episode of the podcast to me, and I'd like to kick it off really with diving back to the start of your career, as you said, air traffic control. Now, there are a few films where we see inside control towers, and in the past it was always a very, very mathematics-led role. What was the interest for you in getting into something like air traffic control?
So for me, actually, the interest came from my old man, who'd been into the civil service and civil aviation authority back in the late 60s and 70s, as they were really starting to get into the early days of applying computer technology to help the air traffic controllers with their tasks. So what you really saw back in the 70s was the revolution, which started a lot of the lower cost and more accessible flights to the general public, because you could shift far more traffic through the airspace when you didn't have to rely on manually tying up the radar return with what you thought was flying in that particular bit of airspace, with the aircraft being told to turn left or right so you could pick out the right one. So that's really how my career started in air traffic control, and it was a response to a job advert which my old man put in front of me and said, why don't you just get a job there while you wait and see what you really want to do? And as it turned out, I ended up staying for 17 years.
Wow. So what was the particular high point for you? What did you enjoy doing the most?
The highlight for me was actually delivering a piece of software to the controllers at Heathrow Airport Tower, which is now still in use today. It's actually called the pre-departure sequence planner. So what it actually does is it takes the optimal sequence of aircraft that you could put on the departure runway so that you can maximize the throughput, minimizing the amount of taxi time on the tarmac, and actually reduce some of the queuing and the fuel burn on the ground caused by some of the congestion you get at the airport. That delivered around 16,000 tons of CO2 saving per annum, and has been in and running since 2013. So that for me was a real win, and as an engineer, a real proud moment to see that kind of advanced mathematics and technology could be put to bear on solving a real problem. And now we see that the benefits have been reaped, and Heathrow is now operating at, or I should say, back in 2019 when everything was a little bit more normal, it's operating to record levels of punctuality as a result of that technology.
It's fantastic, isn't it? It's also fascinating that you solve a problem with technology about, you know, getting the most out of the runways and making sure the planes are stacked in the right order and in the right way, and they're not spending too much time on the runway burning fuel that they don't need to be. But actually, it has financial implications, and really, really pertinent to 2021 now, environmental savings too. And that is it's a buzzword, but it's so important, isn't it, as we move forward to hopefully being carbon neutral by 2050 or 2035, depending on which government you talk to.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And every bit of waste that we could take out of the system all counts towards getting closer to those goals. But notwithstanding that, long haul flight and decarbonising that is an ambition, it is going to be quite a slog to get there. So everything that we can do to minimise the impact of flights that are queuing unnecessarily on tarmac on the ground, or whether they're circling above London waiting for their landing slot, if we can find a way to make sure that inefficiency is minimised, that is only a good thing.
Yeah, it absolutely is. It's always about the 1%. So if you talk to sports people, they always say, oh, you got to find the 1%, and the 1% are the hardest things to find, but they have actually the biggest impact overall. And if you can find many 1%, then we'll be in a much better place in 10 years' time.
Absolutely agree with that.
So let's talk about UAS then. I mean, this is Unmanned Uncovered. So we're talking about a podcast that likes to talk drones and unmanned air systems. Do you have a particular interest in UAS?
So for me, my interest is understanding how UAS is going to integrate safely with the traditional systems where you've got a pilot in the cockpit or a controller on the ground. How are we going to make those two worlds collaborate and cooperate together, particularly when you haven't got somebody who's sat in a chair guiding one of these autonomous systems around? And how are we going to make sure that the controllers know and trust that those systems that are also operating now in the airspace, in and amongst that traditional aviation system, can be directed in a way which is provably safe and which is going to work time after time? That's my primary interest in bringing forward this new world into a world which is predominantly a legacy world where people have known and trusted the way things have worked for the best part of 3/4 of a century. So that's really my interest. I'd love to see autonomy take flight and hopefully bring about a new revolution in flight. So that's my primary interest. I'm not a drone pilot. I don't own a drone. And if I did have a drone in my hands, I'd probably take it flying and do some photography, and that would probably be about it, and as far as I get with it. So my interest is more about actually the engineering and the behind the scenes to enable other people to do all the really, really clever stuff.
Yeah, no, it needs people that do what you do so that drone pilots can do what they do, really. Otherwise, it just wouldn't work. Yeah. And I think we look at regulation a lot. Certainly the beginning of this year, the end of last year, regulation changes came into what drone pilots could fly and where they could fly them. And it's a constant state of flux. And I think that can be a bit of a confusion for the drone world, the UAS world. How does that fit into what you're trying to do? Because if you're trying to work within something and that thing that you're working in is always changing and moving, how do you manage to keep focused on your target?
Well, I hear firsthand some of the challenges around drone operations, in particular around Heathrow, which is, as you might know, or your listeners might know, is we're doing, or they were doing, lots of things around potential surveying, potential patrols around the perimeters. That kind of operation and that kind of mission planning takes a lot of effort to get into the kinds of safety reviews and the gate reviews to get off the ground. And you're talking days, weeks of planning effort. And what we want to be doing is making that a lot simpler for the pilots, so that they can literally, as you would a commercial airliner, file a flight plan, get off the ground according to your flight plan, everything lines up, off you go. It's making that process as simple and as slick as operating a typical commercial flight to the drone operators that we want to achieve, so that we can start doing some of the more innovative and clever stuff with the drones to effect a better surveying outcome and also increase security of the airport perimeter.
Yeah, I guess if you get all the pilots on board and being able to understand the process and it's nice and simple and straightforward, then they'll be more inclined to take advantage of this process and actually implement it in the right way. And I think the danger is that if there's too much confusion, people cut corners, and that's when the problems start to show up.
Indeed, or there's a general lack of awareness of what is going on because of the way that the communications work between the organisations. Sometimes one operator isn't aware of another operator operating in the same place at the same time. That can lead to challenges as well. So yeah, it's about making it easier, more transparent for everybody that has a genuine interest in making the operation as safe as possible to have a view on what's going on and to make it as simple as possible to participate.
Sounds like a winner to me. Now, you've moved to TEKTowr, a company that was formed at the back end of 2018, so it's still a relatively new company. You were saying it's a small startup company. Can you talk us through a little bit about what TEKTowr focuses on and how
Yeah,
they
sure.
came to be as well?
So my business partner, Matt Banham, founder of TEKTowr, actually we got talking around 2019 when we were starting to put together the consortium to go in and build the fly to plan team that was going to go after the Innovate UK funding. And it was literally through a LinkedIn conversation where it started, where I'd put up a post about ADS-B, which is automatic dependent surveillance, being showcased by NASA using blockchain technology. Matt did the proverbial eye roll, not another blockchain use case. And at which point I thought, oh, okay, there's some interest there and intrigue. Let's have a chat. And why not in aviation? That really got the conversation starting. And Matt joined us in the Fly to Plan consortium. And it was back in March last year when obviously COVID hit. And I found myself in a situation where I was at Heathrow Airport, and with virtually no planes flying, some very swift action was taken to restructure the company. I had a moment where it was not looking too favourable, and I came up with Plan B, which was to find somewhere else within the consortium we were putting together to go and work and continue the good work that we'd pulled together in forming the project. As it turned out, Plan B turned out to be a lot more attractive than Plan A. So I came and joined Matt back in December last year, and we've been working together on both Future Flight Challenge projects that both Matt bid on and we bid together with Heathrow. So yeah, it's been a bit of a bumpy ride. For 2020 wasn't a particularly nice year for anybody, but the opportunity that presented itself was one where it's let's take a chance here and see if there's a better way of working and a better way of delivering the project outside of the constraints of an industry that is and is still on its knees, and see if we can find a better way to get the outcomes that we want. That's the story as to how I've joined TEKTowr. Matt is a excellent engineer. He's been working on some fantastic projects, industrial projects and aviation related projects over many years of his career, including delivering the IFACTS project for NATS while he was at Altran, which is basically an algorithm that works out if aircraft are going to bump into each other and proposes resolutions to that some 18 minutes before it's about to happen. So plenty of time for the controllers to react. But as you can imagine, a lot of safety requirements that go into that software and a lot of proving out of the software safety to the regulator. And it's been running many millions of hours now without a single failure, without a single crash of the codes. So yeah, I knew that Matt has the smarts to help us make the Fly to Plan project a success.
Absolutely. It's amazing, isn't it, how out of adversity, so 2020 has been such a tough year for so many people when it comes to work environment, let alone your own mental health and family and things like that. So it's interesting how having to restructure or rethink can bring real positives.
Absolutely. Out of adversity, you can either just sit there and take it, or you can make plans and you can find another way. And I wasn't one to let the grass grow under my feet. So that's really my kind of being. I don't like to sit back and wait for things to happen. I like to make them happen for myself. So.
Well, there you go. If I had a drink, I'd drink to that. There you go. Maybe at the end of the podcast, I'll have a little slurp of something, enjoyable and fizzy. Get the data that's most important to you and your organization with unmanned data services from Consortic. From utility inspections to construction project surveys, our remote pilots will utilize the latest drone technology to give you the most precise and accurate information safely, quickly, and within your budget. Let us do the work for you. Schedule a consultation now at consortic.com. On the website, on TEKTowr's website, there's a nice statement that says TEKTowr brings to market new innovative products and services within safety critical, security critical software environments. Now, you've kind of, I think, already touched on some of the things you do, but can you pick out just maybe one or two examples for us?
Yeah, so in terms of where we are with aviation, we are working within the Fly to Plan project, which is about revolutionising the aviation data ecosystem. And to do that, we need to make sure that what we put in place and as the foundation for potentially replacing some of the legacy systems that have been operating and communicating between global ATC centres for many, many decades. We've got to make sure that if we're going to move those systems into something like the public cloud infrastructure, that we've got a way of governing and a way of onboarding and offboarding participants to make sure that it stays safe, it stays available, it stays reliable and secure, and away from bad actors that might want to interfere with the global aviation ecosystem. With that in mind, we do have to make sure that we're working with some of the very best in cybersecurity. We're working with Oxford University and their cybersecurity research department to make sure that we've got the threat model understood and that we've got the processes and governance in place to make sure that the system of systems stays as secure as it has been over these many decades. So that's one such example. We're also working in industrial Internet of Things dashboarding for smart factory operations. And to do that, we can deploy into the public cloud infrastructures. So we have to make sure that the things that we put in place there have got the adequate levels of security to make sure that there's no threats loaded onto any of the machines that are operating in the estate of that industrial manufacturer. So yeah, we've got examples of where we're doing that security threat modeling and making sure that we design systems that are fundamentally secure and reliable.
It's great as a business point of view that you have this aspect, this cyber security, and that security of data is critical. But it's a real shame, isn't it, that we even have to look into this and focus so much of time and resource onto people trying to do bad things to our data and trying to infiltrate our systems. It seems to be such a shame that we can't all work together and just not have this part of our lives. But maybe that's a different philosophical debate for another time.
Well, yeah, I guess wars aren't fought on battlefields anymore, are they? So, elections aren't won and lost by fair means. Some might argue. Unfortunately, it's a shame that the benefits the internet has also brought some disbenefits as well. But staying one step ahead of those people that would want to use those public utilities for ill gains, then that's going to be a fact of life. There's always going to be a criminal element out there and a political element or a nation state threat that will seek to exploit and divide. So it's a shame, but we are in a world that isn't all unicorns and roses.
Beautifully put. And I was looking at the TEKTowr website, and the names of some of the companies you've worked with. It's quite a stellar lineup. I mean, the UK government, BAE Systems, Rolls-Royce are in there, Airbus, Lockheed Martin, many more as well. In the main, aviation focused. And then we move on to this fly to plan. You've mentioned fly to plan, and we've talked about it a little bit, but for those who don't know what fly to plan is, can you give us an overview of the whole thought process?
Okay, so thought process number one, putting together a project like this, was how could we as an airport do better? So while I was head of IT architecture at Heathrow, we had the demonstration of SETA's flight chain, which is a blockchain-based proof of concept, which proved that you could exchange aviation data via a blockchain. And so that's all very nice because you can exchange data between Miami, Heathrow, and Geneva, British Airways and Heathrow. And it kind of proved that, yeah, the technology works. It's quite difficult to handle in certain instances, but fundamentally what it didn't answer was how would you govern it? Fundamentally, what it didn't answer is why would you need it?
Yeah.
And what I looked at the overall aviation ecosystem, it slowly dawned on me that actually the whole ecosystem that we've known and trusted over many decades, things such as the Aeronautical Fixed Telephone Network, the AFTN, is already decentralized, but it runs on some of the oldest technology you could find. It is running on the same sort of teletypewriter serial line type connections that you used to have in the 1960s and 70s.
Right, okay.
And so that system of systems has persisted rightly for many decades because it's tried and trusted and it works. But if you look at the what you have in the toolbox today to help you deliver computing capability and getting information to the right user at the right place at the right time, you've now got things like public cloud within the toolbox. So Azure, AWS, IBM, all of these big providers can offer you the computing power of the cloud without you having to invest in capital infrastructure, punching holes through walls and connecting up centers for between nation states with very expensive private leased lines. You look at that overall model of system of systems and the cost associated with it versus what you could have by using some of the public cloud infrastructures, you can recognize actually there's an opportunity here to build something that is more reliable, more secure, lower cost, and gets information to the right person, the right place at the right time, including operators that might be out in the field. So for instance, your drone operator that might be connected in via 4G or 5G. Now that's what you don't have with these old systems. They are in buildings. They are literally where an operator used to sit and wait for the strip of paper to fall out on the teletypewriter. So that's the kind of thinking that went through my head as to actually if we're going to integrate the system of systems for these unmanned traffic management operators, we ought to think about the traditional systems that are still in play in traditional aviation. So that was the thought processes behind getting this off the ground.
So what sort of data, when we talk about sharing data, you said, Heathrow, Miami, pick an airport around the world. What sort of data do these airports need to share with each other on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour, minute-to-minute basis?
So everything typically is anchored off of the schedule. So when you schedule a flight, you're scheduling and publishing that schedule to the global distribution services. They're helping the agents sell the tickets. As you pick up your ticket, you've got a known time where you're expected to turn up 2 hours before your flight time to get to the airport. Now, in that time between selling the ticket and then you actually getting through the airport and into the lounge and then getting on your flight, there's an awful lot of stuff that's going on behind the scenes to flight plan, to check you in, to make sure that you're the right person that the ticket has been sold to, and you've got all of your passport details, etc., sent through to the next government that where you're going to. And that flight planning exchange of information is then augmented again by further information from the airport, which is planning which stand you're going to go onto. So it's gate you will board the aircraft from. And then further down the chain, you're going to be sending that flight planning information onwards to all of the air traffic control centres that will be handling that flight as you get from up in the air and across the continents. So within that chain of systems, there is a huge amount of organisations that will be handling that one flight object and adding information as it builds a richer picture of what is likely to happen, so that the next person that's going to be handling the flight knows and understands what they can expect and what the needs of that aircraft are.
It, I think, demonstrates really, doesn't it, how critical cybersecurity is when it comes to this sort of thing, all that amount of data that's being shared. Absolutely,
yeah. And it is secure today by virtue of the fact that it tends to be so old that it is well off the grid. It's and the private wires that are punched through the holes in the sides of the buildings. It gets that security by the nature of the tech that's in play. So when some of those technologies are now long past their sell by date and you can't buy them anymore from the telco providers, you have to think differently, and that's where the big nasty internet is looming, because some of these technologies natively don't have the kind of security capabilities that you'd expect in the modern applications would need to make sure they stay safe. So that's where we can look at these technologies such as blockchain, such as distributed ledger technologies, so that we can figure out if those have a place to make sure that we know exactly who is handling the data, exactly who's put the data in, whether they've been licensed to do that, and so on and so forth. So it's really about shifting our mindset around what's secure and what is that property, and what is that trust that we can put in the information by knowing exactly who's participating in that network, rather than just assuming it's got to be right because it's come from a known building and a known place.
Yeah.
So that's really where we're thinking about transforming the way we think about how data is both put on the chain and then used downstream and upstream. So that's the nuts and bolts of the project, and we've got a great team that have coming together to rally behind the vision, because we see that this has to happen in order to unlock that benefit to the UK, which I think PwC issued a report saying unlocking up to £30 billion worth of benefit to the UK economy by 2030 is that's a very big number. Yeah. Actually, I think it's 42 billion, so it's a much bigger number.
That's an insane number, isn't it, when you think of it? I mean, it's impossible to picture, isn't it, really, just how many zeros go onto a number like that? I'll scribble down a bit of paper here. What are the hurdles? But I think really we've overcome or discussed enough what you've identified the hurdles are. It's a case of security and that kind of thing. But what has the response been globally about the concept of fly to plan?
Kind of under the radar at the moment, but we've been reaching out to some of the other projects that have been dabbling with blockchains, and we've seen that there's been some progress over in the US with the MITRE Corporation undertaking some similar activities to what we're doing, and looking at some of the other blockchain technologies. So we're looking at Hyperledger. They've had a look at Tendermint, and if you take the report in its form, which recommends that actually there is a case here now to look at the blockchain technology to enable some of the concepts such as system-wide information management, then actually we're finding there's some bright spots globally that where we have opportunities to collaborate, and we have opportunities to work together to influence at the highest levels up to ICAO level to start to see those changes. So that's really positive. Anything that you see in aviation does take a long time, and with the investment cycles that typically operate, so the air traffic control company in the UK is regulated on 5-yearly chunks, as is Heathrow Airport. So the investment cycles are long, and it does mean that those companies want to get the most out of the existing investments before they then move on to the next technology. So we do have to make sure that we are in step with those kind of timescales, and that we are proposing solutions and laying the foundations for making those changes acceptable at this moment now, so that in years to come, it's a much easier switch.
Yeah. So with all these things, this is focused, I say, mainly on air traffic management when it comes to manned aircraft, but it has a huge impact on unmanned traffic management as well, as you were saying, because it enables the drone pilot out in the field to be able to plan their flight and input their flights, and their flight data will then be, or their flight plan will then be uploaded, and everyone can see what's going on. What will the impact be, do you think, long term on the unmanned air systems environment?
I think you're going to see an awful lot more innovation and competition, perhaps with UTM providers, perhaps operating different segments of the sky. So, for instance, do you go for a centralized model where one rules the whole country, or do you go for a more nuanced model where there's different operators and different UTM platform providers providing overlapping coverage or individual coverage in certain areas, and collaborating and exchanging information? I don't know how it's going to play out. What we are trying to do is make sure that the protocols we set are open standards, so that we are not effectively in any way a kind of dominant player within the market, because that's not what this project has ever been about. It's been about making sure that the global ecosystem functions effectively, and then this foundation layer where safety is paramount is not a place where we should be competing. It should be a place where that is a fundamental and given for all. And then you build out some of the artificial intelligence services on top of that, so that you can efficiently and effectively route your drones through multiple drop deliveries and things like that. So that could be the way that the system plays out. But I have no crystal ball, and depending on how widespread public adoption is for drone deliveries or other kinds of services is really going to be key, I think. So yeah, it's really early days. I wouldn't like to speculate much more than that.
I think what's really nice is that we've touched upon everything to enough of a point to hopefully pique the interest of our listener. And when I say listener, we have more than one listener, but I'm just talking about the individual.
I hope so.
Listening at the time. We have 3 listeners. No, we have more than that. But when we come to this fly to plan and TEKTowr, and if people want to find out more, what's the best place for them to go? Where should they be looking?
Yeah, follow us on LinkedIn. Look at our website, www.tektowr.com. We've got a section in there describing our careers. We've got our people listed there. So we've got a fantastic team. We're always looking out for talented engineers that can come and join. So if you would like to get in touch with us, please don't hesitate. My only bit of advice is don't wait to see a job advert put up there. Just come and tell us all about yourself and see if we're the right company for you. That's it.
Perfect.
Great talking to you, Bryn.
Perfect. So yeah, if you are interested, TEKTowr, you've made it catchy, haven't you? TEKTowr.com is the website. I do urge you to go and have a look. I had a look on there, and even for someone with my limited brain capacity, found it very, very interesting and simple to understand as well. So thank you very much for making it useful for someone like me as well.
Well, it's simple enough for me, simple enough for absolutely anyone, I promise you that. So brilliant. It's been absolutely brilliant talking to you.
Yeah, absolute real pleasure, my end too. So thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you.
My thanks go to Simon Brown from TEKTowr, as we recorded that podcast during some pretty windy weather here in the UK, and so we had some slight technical issues, but there you go. Hopefully you enjoyed the episode. You can find many, many more on your podcast provider. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and also check out Consortic, that's consortic.com, to find out how you can better use drones within your organisation. That's it for me, Bryn Lucas, for another episode. Join me next time. Until then, stay safe. Thanks for listening.